years of poetry and then about 20 for prose. And I was last year for reading with Christina Baker Klein, who was so generous in having a conversation with me, and my last memoir, which was about going to sea when I was 17 on a square rig sailing ship. So we're going to do this meander tonight about what it is being writing buddies and how it really supports us as writers. And we thought that we'd each just explain ourselves a little bit and start each of us with a poem to just get our voices out there, and then we'll go back and forth. So in memory of Mother's Day, my son called me yesterday, and he was up on Stonington with his partner and his toddler named Apollo. And so I remembered this poem that I wrote for my son on his 18th birthday. And I'm going to try to get through it without crying. I gave you stories and gardens, a song for my son on his 18th birthday. I gave you stories and gardens and traveling quietly together. We drive over the long hills home, you in your car seat next to me. I'd hold your sturdy little hand and we'd watch the light change together, pointing out the clouds branching so high above us. We still drive, watching your long young man's body in the driver's seat, hurtling us over those same hills as the etched shadows of clouds pour over the wooded hills below us. Stories read aloud were the pillars of your days, the morning beginning with "Read, Mommy, read," as you'd climb into our bed with your new pile of books, the nights ending with either your dad or me lying beside you, often falling asleep before you as we read aloud. You had your elbow ready to butt us awake to read just a little more. I gave you gardens. Everywhere I live, gardens emerge out of the landscape. Pregnant with you, I planted apple trees and poppies beside the marsh stream and brooks. When you were 4, we began new gardens together. We called the roots dragons as we wrestled each wily tail out from the old rock wall, creating new gardens next to the meadow high on the hill. When you were 9, you discovered the joys of tree pruning. We'd stand back to look before we chose which next branch to cut to shape the star magnolia. I gave you stories and gardens and your father. So many children keep drifting back into their mother's field, and I kept steadily returning you to the arms of your noble father. He gave you your jet black thatch of hair, already hinting white, and your deep Greek eyes surveying our lives. He carried you snuggled against his chest the day you were born, taking you into his shop over the stream, introducing you to the clean smell of freshly planed poplar, ready to become strong rails of ladders to stretch up into the branches of apple trees. He said, "This is my world." I gave you stories and gardens, and you gave us our life that we created for you. There we go. All right, Linda.
Well, I'm Linda Buckmaster, and I moved up here because I wanted to be a writer, but that was 1973, and it took a couple decades. And I started really writing seriously after the sudden death of my husband. And I wouldn't say that that was necessarily a catalyst per se. It was just the next phase of my life, and became very serious about that, and started writing poetry and essay and getting published in various places. And I've had people, sitting next to me in the airplane, and they ask me what I am, and now retired from everything else. I'm a writer. You have to make that claim for yourself, and they would say, "Oh, well, might I have read anything you wrote?" They're trying to find out if I'm famous or something. And I say, well, if you read semi-obscure second-level literary journals, yeah, you might have seen something of mine. So I made a career of that for a while, and then started working on some books, which I have to say, I think I'm a little tired of books. I want to have a little more room to go at that point. So I just, while you were reading, I decided to change what I was going to do. And let me see if I can find it in a quick way. Radio waves. So one of the things I really like to do is write what we would now call flash, short essays, and with a lot of a lyrical, but also a narrative to it. And this one is one of my older ones that I like very much. Radio waves, on the road. In the early days of our family, when I was 4 and before my brother, it was only me and no car air conditioning. My parents drove all night through the Southwest to escape the heat of the day as we went from West Coast to East. It was the beginning of the aerospace industry, and my father followed the jobs around the country with his GI Bill engineering degree, Riverside, Long Beach, Norfolk, Maryland, and eventually Cape Canaveral. We were in some kind of Chevrolet coupe, of course, secondhand. That's what he always drove. In later years, I associated the rounded lines and grinning grills of the earthly 1950s models with the possibilities of family. In the mornings, we would pull into a motel where I amused myself with books and dolls while they slept. My mother woke late morning and took me to the pool so my father, the driver, could get a few more hours sleep. After lunch in the car, he would tell jokes and sing loudly in what he called his whiskey tenor. When the moon hits the eye like a big pizza pie, that's amore, he would sing, never finishing a whole song. We drove through the afternoon and evening, the desert landscape rolling by. After a long sunset, the funnel of the headlights revealed just what was necessary to know of the road ahead. My parents talked through the night, quietly or not at all. My young self witnessed to the dashboard light intimacy. Eventually, I climbed into the rounded window shelf above the back seat, just cozy enough for a small child, and hypnotized myself with the passing lights that faded away into the darkness as the radio played softly and my father sang along from time to time. Patsy Cline, Hank Williams, Flatt and Scrubs, music that was always best with a bit of nighttime static behind it, conveying great distances traveled, and those left to go. I was too young to understand the situations they were singing about in those songs, but the music told me everything I needed to know. The high, lonesome sound drifted around the car while the hot air poured through my father's window, his elbow languishing on the door. The singer's plaintive storytelling, the dobro's call, the pedal steel guitar pulling long and low, the fiddle alternating between joy and sorrow. This was life, I came to imagine, or at least my father's idea of life. From those songs, I learned about loneliness and longing and loss, real or imagined. I heard how they wrapped around each other in harmony and traveled with us through the hot night on invisible waves of air. So this is my new book, Journey Waters, Poems, Prose, and Places. And this is a retrospective of the last 25 years or so of my writing. And I started this project probably about 3 years ago, maybe going on 4 now. I just had this idea that maybe I wanted to gather some of my older work together, so I could have it all in one place. Oh, maybe I could do a little chapbook. Would I have enough? And I started looking back through my stuff, and I realized I had a lot. So I sorted them into the A pile and the B pile and the C pile. And what happened to me in the process of doing this, it was something I hadn't anticipated. It became a retrospective for myself through my writing life. So looking at what my concerns were, what my style and craft was at various places. I only picked the good ones, don't worry. And who I was then, and how would I treat this topic now, and that. So it was really quite the project, and I recommend it for anyone over the age of 70, to tell you the truth. So each one of these in here pieces is has a place related to it, and they could be very specific places, you know, like Obrash, Portugal, or they could be someplace like the one I just read, which was on the road. So that's me. Okay, my dear, what's next?
You were going to talk about
Oh,
writing,
okay.
definition of writing buddies, or what we've been doing.
Got into this. We started, we were working at the same time, as you can see. Both lived in Belfast, weren't, you know, we were acquaintances, but we would go to each other's, you know, readings that we'd have. And we had many more in Belfast back in this time, and this would have been the mid-1990s. And so we heard each other's work, and we, you know, start to fall together as colleagues in that kind of way. And then Elizabeth went to Stonecoast, and I followed after. And we started calling ourselves writing buddies. And what that meant was that we were, I like to say it this way, we were witnesses to each other's writing life. You know, I mean, your friends, your family, they can only listen to so much of talk about commas and things like that. You know what I mean? And so we were watching the ups, the downs. We were encouraging, supporting. We do some editing of each other's works, but that's not the basic of it. We share resources, and we probably get together once every couple months and catch each other up. There's also a little bit of a, you know, that you have to show up. You're going to go see, you're going to have tea with Elizabeth, and you want to tell her what you've done in the last time. So that's what we're writing buddies.
And we discovered that we have these overlaps. Like I was working one-on-one with Baron Wormser, and he said, I think you should consider Stonecoast, and to really get that kind of expertise and mentoring and taking your writing to the next level. So I started for a year, and Linda, about a year later, said, okay, so tell me, how is it Stonecoast, and what are you doing, and I said, well, one of the first things is I'm not writing poetry anymore. And she went, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, that made me more, because I was into essay, which I still do, I had done for a lot of, and that made me, you know, I could see how much more open the program was than I anticipated.
Right,
and,
that there was this flexibility. Yeah. And then what's great about an MFA is how you get pushed to go, or at least there, to go deeper, and what's the deeper story. And I thought I was going to keep writing about life in Maine, and then it was like, oh, the deeper story was about growing up as an architect's daughter in Cincinnati in the 60s and 70s, and what it was like living in the 60s, and what it was like living with a parent who was bipolar. And the story got more complex, and I remember Baron said, I was just writing so many different things, and Baron said, just keep going till you're done, then give the whole big messy pile to an editor, and then get feedback on what's the through line, where is the energy and the electricity. And she said, it's about you and your dad and architecture. I went, my dad, I want to write about my dad. So I told that to Linda, and then Linda was working on, and she realized, oh no, I have to write about my dad and the space industry. And then we realized that the space industry and modern architecture had incredible similarities in terms of themes that we were writing about, modern materials. And then we also realized we both had heart issues. And part of that modern materials is Linda has this modern plastic that went in her heart. She was a poster child for open heart surgery as a child. And so it was sort of this, sometimes it got ridiculous. We went, oh no, heart stuff or father stuff. And then every so often we'll go, oh, and then I was working on my sea story, and then she's writing about cod. It was like, okay.
Just kidding. Yeah. And I did not bring Space Heart tonight to show you. And that Space Heart, a memoir in stages. Get it? Stages. Rockets, like rockets. That was my first book like that.
Right.
So let's go to what was your breakthrough? Your breakthrough in publishing, or the moment that you felt like, oh, I'm a writer. This is who I am now.
So in 2004, I went to Searsport where Left Bank Books had just opened. And these three women had decided they were going to open this bookstore. I remember walking around and going, if they can do this, I can bring out a book. And had just turned 50, and it was like, I remember I heard Robert Bly give a reading in my 20s in Berkeley, and I remember him saying, don't rush to publish. Really wait until you know something. So I kept thinking, all right, don't rush to publish. I went, 50, I think I can bring out a book now. And I went, all right, I didn't do it. Linda got published in all these poetry journals. I just went along, as a mom with 2 kids, I didn't have time to keep sending things out. So I just worked on eventually pulling together a manuscript. So I thought, okay, if they can do this bookstore, I'm going to bring out a book. And they said, when you bring out your book, you can have your reading here. And it was my first real bringing out a collection. And it was incredibly gratifying and incredibly, to put together what I'd been working on for a long period of time. And then to ask my friend Louise Bourne for paintings on the covers and I at first asked for 1, and then I ended up getting 4 paintings because I couldn't leave any behind. And then what was great about this is to self-publish, I needed ISBN numbers. So I went online to line up buying one ISBN number, and I realized for the same price you could buy 10, and you had to put down what the name of your press was. And it was like, yes, I'm a press. And there was this acupuncture point named the Illuminated Sea. So I named my press the Illuminated Sea Press.
She's an acupuncturist.
Right? So I had brought out this book, and I was doing my first readings, and Barron said, how did you do that? And I said, all right, I'll sell you an ISBN number. And I had a designer, and I had this guy who knows how to be a print liaison. And I sort of, here's my kit, and passed it on to him. And then he brought out a book, and he went, that was the easiest, most satisfying published experience I've ever had. And then Corinne Spitfire and Linda came to me and said, all right, so it created this little press. I used up the first 10. Other people from other places, I said, start your own, right? Keep it going. But the only rules were people had to have a beautiful book, and it had to be mature, skillful work. But they had to, when they'd figured out how to do it, they had to then pass it on to the next person. I worked. So you brought out a book.
Yeah, well, I have 2 stories, but I'm only going to tell one of when I think might have been my breakout.
Right.
So I had taken a sabbatical from work. I worked for a nonprofit, and I was in my early 50s at this point. My son was in college. My husband had passed away, so I was in a new era. And I traveled around Mexico for 6 weeks by myself. And I've just been revisiting this again and going, that was quite the trip. So when I came back, I wrote a little chapbook, and this is, down a county copy, and you'd staple it. And the cover here, the artwork here is from a Mexican blouse. I took a photocopy of it and then made that. So it's Momentitos, A Mexican Journey. And so I started doing some readings, outside of Belfast. And was down at, at the time, it was in Rockland, and it's now, was Rock City at that point, and Lacey, Second Read. It was Second Read then, and Lacey was the owner, and she invited me to read. So my first out of town reading. And so it was me, Lacey, another member of the audience, and Kathleen Ellis. So some of you know Kathleen Ellis, and she was there. Well, so, 4 people. So you can see we're used to, we don't care if we have 4 people or
Four
not.
people
We're
is
used to
great.
that kind of, that was my first experience. And she came up to me afterwards because she had been in Mexico quite a bit and whatnot. And,
Yeah.
and so she was really interested in the work, and she invited me to be one of the readers at Poets Speak in Bangor. I mean, so it's incredibly generous right off the bat. And I and I was taken aback that, wow, okay, I'm one of them. And that was really a breakthrough. And one of the things that also was a side thing about that is that I respected and really loved her generosity, and also wanted to continue that myself. And I think both Elizabeth and I have really wanted to showcase other people, especially when we were poets laureate at different times, bringing people forward. It wasn't about us, and supporting others in the work that they did. So one of the poems in here is called Hymn. And then I used it here again in my newest book. So my first and my newest, and I'm going to read it here. Hymn, Monte Alban, Oaxaca. I remember the bees. 30 years ago, I was at this place, and I remember the bees, intense even then with their noisy work, swarming us, making a life from this dry landscape, the moment of flowering, theirs. A mere 2,500 years earlier, humans built here to worship over a wide ocean of bare mountains, leaving what we call ruins, gods forgotten, yet deeply remembered. And the bees, how many years for them, the sweet nectar of their praise-making, and before that, the hard-packed earth singing.
So I was thinking about what you were saying, Martha, about making sure you go to different people's readings. And one of the things that we learned is it's really important to be a literary good citizen. And so when I read a book I really like, I try to write a book review and I post it online, or send it in. I got a book review, in the Portland Press Herald, they have a sort of books by your bedside, and I reviewed, I'm forgetting the name of the book, by one of the literal press editor,
Agnes?
Agnes. She wrote a
Agnes
Russian novel. It was extraordinary. This big, fat Russian novel. It was amazing. And I thought, someone needs to really honor this, because I don't know how many people are going to wade through a big Russian novel written in Portland, Maine, at the beginning of the war in Ukraine. So I wrote raving about this book, and it got published a year later. It was like, and Agnes wrote to me and was so touched. It was like, that's being, encouraging and supporting other writers. And one of the things that we were part of and kept going, there was a group of people up in Bangor who started the Belfast Poetry Festival in 2004, and they decided where in Maine would be a cool place to put on a festival. And they decided Belfast, but they didn't know anyone in Belfast. So I was sort of plucked out to join their team. And I came up with the idea with another poet of creating a poets and artists poetry and art walk. And we had it in galleries all around, or in different locations all over town. And it was one of my favorite things about the festival for years. It was like this poetry and art matchmaking, and we'd make a
Yes,
list
we had a good time doing that.
of artists, and
Carl Little.
Carl
Who would
Little.
we put with?
Who were you paired up with?
David Estey, yes.
It was great. Incredible combination. It was so exciting.
Yes, you read at Darby's, the restaurant and bar.
Right. And the writing that people wrote and the art that people did was sort of, was so surprising for both people and the audience. It was just really exhilarating. and a great part of that. And I thought this is part of also supporting artistic creative community. It's like encouraging people to step out of what they usually do and playing together. And um, oh my gosh,
yeah.
Charles Simic, the first year. Yes,
And Dorianne Lurks, I think, what's her?
Dorian Lau.
She was the first keynoter. We saw her on, by, not Zoom, not whatever that technology was back then. She was on a screen. We saw it.
So that was.
Well, I can jump in.
Poets
Yeah.
Laureate, right.
Oh, right, we were poets.
So one of that was a funny thing. It's like how to be a poet laureate of a small town. And what I was sort of the first real official one, and I started a poetry column in the newspaper, and it was a thrill. It was like I picked these poems, or often pairs of poems, to follow the seasons of the year. That's okay. And I remember like out on my walk at 5 in the morning, and here's this teacher going off to school going, I really love that West McNair poem that you picked out. And it was like, and one of my highest compliments was the typesetter had said, when we started those poems at the beginning of the year, I hated those poems. But she said, now at the end of the year, I make sure I read them and I really enjoy them. So it was, but one of the funny things that happened was, we started being asked to compose a poem for an event. Like it was this 19th century writing a poetry of an occasion.
An occasional poem.
So there was the new walking bridge that opened in Belfast, and I composed a poem. My daughter said, oh no, Mom, I forgot to give you the message from the mayor last night. And it was 8 in the morning and the bridge opening was at 10, but he asked if you could write a poem. And I had been thinking and waiting. It was like so I whipped together, I can't remember where that poem is. But anyway, then 2 weeks later, then people from Waterfall Arts was about to open. And they said, well, we want a poem too. So it felt like stepping into this really delightful 19th century mindset of creating a poem and then reading it at an opening event. And it was really fun. So I thought I would read the, so Waterfall Arts used to be out at this incredible place at the Kingdom, and and there are these waterfalls there, and I had painted out there, so I knew that landscape. So I was thinking of that when I thought about how to honor the Waterfall Arts coming to Belfast. So this poem is called When a Waterfall Comes to Town. Do you remember waiting in a parking lot so long that you started leafing through the Maine Gazetteer? After you found the page where you live, where old boyfriends once lived, and the fastest way to Waterville by back roads, you discover the lists of things, the highest mountains, longest rivers, all the lighthouses, and best of all, the waterfalls of Maine. Some people plan to knock through that list in a season. Others entice their kids to find the crashing, foaming Moxie Falls. Some dream of clambering up and over the rooted trails following the falls at Gulf Haggis, determined they'll finally get there this summer. I collect waterfalls that aren't on the list. In stories people tell of where to swim on hot days, how to find the path to Monroe Falls where the eels tickle your legs as you swim. So what does it take to move a waterfall to town? What does it mean for a waterfall to pick up her skirts, gather her swirling pools, pack up her bounding streams, and slide her cascading waves into a moving van? Can't you hear her? Listen, she's coming down the stairs, swirling round the corners, slipping under studio doors. This waterfall undulates down walls, catapults into sculptures, fans across rooftops, pours in a Niagara fantasy of color. This waterfall leaps unawares into the dreams of our town sleeping around her, priming us all with her startling waters, so we may fall inexplicably into canvases of our own making. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Yes, his
It's his birthday.
big bash is coming up. And of course, I know him from way back in the day. So going on with this civic role that we've taken on ourselves, when I was poet laureate, one of the things I did was to take a group of poets who were willing down to the Belfast Historical Society. They opened it up for us, and we just wandered around. And people took notes, and of course, you find out all things you didn't know about the town. And I can't. I'm not sure what anybody else did with it. I think Ellen Sander did something, but this is what I did. Quote: "Girls wanted at once to learn the cigar trade." End quote. Poster at the Belfast, Maine Historical Society. Girls wanted. Those delicate fingers needed to roll local farm tobacco picked by other girls in thin frocks, or boys fed on pies and potatoes wanted from the hands of girls. Girls wanted for blanket mills, pants factories, shoe shops, sardine plant. Quick and nimble, no married women need apply, can't keep their minds on the work, thinking about families, thinking about sick child, thinking about himself coming home, dinner to be got, baby to be nursed. Girls wanted money, love, power, and more for you if you're faster than just fast enough. Filling tins, threading looms, stitching soles, plucking chickens. Girls wanted for organizing union, but not there long enough before the next baby, next injury, next man. Girls into women, married and later wanted to make family ends meet, wanted for maturity, wanting maybe to make supervisor someday, easier on the hands and feet, earning more but more responsible. Girls wanted respect, 40 years on the line, so you can say, 40 years on the line, I'm gonna miss the girls. The other thing I've fallen into is teaching what I'm calling community-based writing workshops. And what I mean by that is that they are not necessarily under the venue of academia or anything like that. I'm just doing what I want to do because I want to. Sometimes I get paid, the institution where let's say the library or the conservation organization gets a grant, and then I get paid then. But mostly I do them for free. And I've been doing this for well over a decade now, and I do it just because I love it. It is so much fun. I get to do whatever I want, whenever I want, gear the topic that, then you have all these willing adults who are hanging on your every word, and everyone, the biggest thrill for me is surprises themselves about what they walked away from, whatever level they came up with. Now, some are more craft oriented, and that only certain people are doing or attracted to that, but others are, newbies. I always wanted to. Now I'm retired. I always wanted to, or my mother, or that kind of thing. And I find it's stimulating for me. It keeps me in the game. And right now I have my first long-term group, just because people who had worked with me, I noticed that we're working on longer prose projects, and we're always wanting to be able to have other people to talk it with. So I run this little prose group, and we meet once a month, and they get to do, present their work based on the homework I gave, and I do a craft talk, and which means I have to prep, right? Because I have to go back and go, well, wait, how's that actually work? So it's a win-win situation, and people have a good time with it, and I do too. And I've also done um, classes for Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance, and they pay generously for that. But I just feel like here we are, we're a small group, we're working together, and it's just that kind of exchange, so I enjoy it. So, where are we now?
I was thinking about creating our own residencies. Because we were talking when you first got here about going to residencies and going to classes, and then after a certain point, you can spend a lot of time applying to residencies and waiting and seeing if you get in and figure out how to get there. And we started making up, all right, we can go to residencies, create it on our own. So and our favorite thing to do is going to islands. So we've, both
Our
of
first
it,
one was not
Great
Grace
Spruce
Russo.
Head.
No, that wasn't us.
right, that was set up, but
We
then
were
I
then-
kept going back on my own. But then we would go to Bear Island and rent a cottage, the Rose Cottage there, and we'd ask an artist. Louise Bourne came with us a couple of years, and 2 or 3 writers, and then we would just haul in food and what we needed and be sort of quiet in the morning, and then we'd get together in the late afternoon and talk about what we had been working on that day and create it like the best of what we liked about writers or residencies. We would just do it on our own. And
And it was very important that you invite the right people. You know, they might be a very dear friend or a lovely writer, but do you want to spend a week on
with
an
them.
island with them? Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
yeah,
And so it has a history there. This is the Buckminster Fuller's family island, and it's just a very magical place. And you can sit there and look up, across the bay to Belfast.
yeah.
We watch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, right. Yes.
Really clear.
Well, and we were both there. I mean, different times. We were the writer.
There would be one writer,
It was so special.
photographer, and then the rest were painters.
And that's when I realized I wanted to hang around these painter types. I mean, they're all there's 7 screened portraits or something like that. And I have a poem that we do not have here now about. I'll send it out. I think you'd like it if you haven't seen it. Actually, I have a couple. Actually, I did a whole trifold of poetry there. But about it starts something like. It was the Fairfield Porter painting with the dog sitting up at the top. So it starts with the dog is still there. Because there still was a Dale, you know, up against that yellow building and looking down at the dock. And yeah, it was the first really spark as far as a residency. And you stay, yeah,
The big houses.
yeah. I mean, the ghost of those places is incredible. I mean, it pretty much had everybody, a lot of people who were people to know in the mid 20th century came
We're
through
all
there
there.
for
Right.
some period. Yeah, yeah, I know,
Yeah.
I know. That, and I have one of my poems says, "My socks are in the same drawer." Yeah, it was quite good.
So I was fortunate that there was an artist photographer, Michael Weymouth. Carl wrote a blurb on the back of this. His wife said, "I think you want to look at this book of poems that was on Anina's bookshelf." And she said, "Her poems remind me of your paintings." So I got this letter out of the blue saying, "Would you like to collaborate on a book? I have all these photographs and paintings of Great Spruce Head Island and Penobscot Bay." So it was great to go back and write more, and we'd give each other assignments. So this is all about Great Spruce Head. And to just spend a day been in like the boathouse and looking at all the details. And what's also interesting, when you're on an island, there's so much time, so the poems kept stretching longer and longer. So one night, the cook was making this incredible, elaborate meal, and I think it's a 3-page poem all about making this meal, but it's like all the details and all the, the pots on the wall and, what he was putting into it and the recipe. It was so fun to take that time to make a long, elaborate, to make the poem go on as long as it took to make the meal. And I won't read it because it's a long poem. I had this extraordinary experience. I'll sort of paraphrase this poem. It was because you'd sit around at that long, long table, and there was room for like 22 people to sit and to talk. And the evening, the light would settle, and the candles on the table, and people telling stories, and Anina talking about when her uncle Elliot was photographing birds' nests. And she was a girl, and she'd take the birds' nests home and put them in her room. And then there was sort of telling Bucky Fuller stories. And then there was talking about his aunt, Margaret Fuller, who was pregnant when she went down with the ship in the middle of the North Atlantic with her Italian count lover. So hearing these different stories, and then it was like a little explosion inside of me, that because they were talking about her going down with the ship and Bucky Fuller standing in the water with a gun to his head about to commit suicide, and then deciding to go back to life. And then that was the beginning of his study, and that he wanted to understand life, and he wanted to understand what his aunt had done. Which here, I'll read that part. He walked into the sea at night, stood up to his neck, holding the pistol to his head. Staring into the sky of stars, he faced the tragic mystery of his life. He vowed to learn everything, to understand his life, his daughter, and why his aunt chose to slip into the sea. These tales whisper around the china at the wooden plank table, past hand-caned chairs, and settle reverberating through a story I have carried like an old rosewood vase for 50 years. At this table, my history shifts perspective. My great-grandmother stood on the deck of the Lusitania after the crumpling thud of the torpedo, the rapid listing, the frantic cry, women and children to the lifeboats. How did she stand in that brief, vast, chilling moment of choice? Survivors reported she was last seen walking arm in arm with my great-grandfather, calmly returning to their stateroom, leaving my grandmother alone at age 20 in college to wake to the news of their vanishing into the North Atlantic. We sit at the porter's table of grandparents, uncles, and aunts. Fairfield's paint-splattered easels still on the porch, Eliot's photographs on the wall, poems to be read next to the fire. The stories continue. So it was just this, those magic moments, and it felt timeless and ageless. And
I have a poem.
you have a poem.
I have a poem, a great
Oh, the
spruce head.
caretakers. Oh,
Yeah,
perfect.
and to talk about timelessness. The caretakers, Great Sprucehead Island. They'll grow old someday, too old to take care of other people's islands, the family old too, and generative, descendants of industrialists coming east to buy an island. Year in, year out, the gentle pull of season floats their days. June and the houses are opened, September closed up. The family arrives, the family leaves, the tractor comes out of the barn, then returns. Lobster traps are set and later hauled. The price of bait goes up. Until their children on the mainland begin to worry. An hour boat ride, then another 40 minutes to a hospital. Small mistakes and lapses are noticed. Storm shutters get too heavy to lift and the ladder shaky. Familiar woods become confusing. The family and the children confer. The caretakers move on shore. Years later, on a fine summer day, someone brings them over on a lobster boat. He stands at the hauling station. She sits with a scarf and windbreaker. As they come to the dock, they notice changes, a new tractor, the clothesline restaked. They note their handiwork still standing, the shingles a little grayer or replaced. They can't remember which generation it is that greets them. They catch up on deaths and births and storms. The tide runs into the cove, then out.
So I thought, how about we just talk about
What we're
what
doing?
we're up to next?
Okay.
So Carl had mentioned, I've been writing these little, so sort of little flash essays about my mom through her 90s. And I started, because my mother had decided at about 92, she said, I think I need to read Proust. She said, I'm working my way through the classics. My mom was so dyslexic, she didn't really learn to read with any pleasure until she was pregnant with me and she needed to be on bed rest for the last few months. So that was the first time that she had enjoyed reading. And then she just kept reading, and she, in her 90s, she was reading 2 or 3 books, been reading 2 or 3 books a week. She reads the New York Times. So I started writing these little vignettes. I would spend time with her. She'd moved up close to me. I never imagined that I was going to be a major caretaker for my mom. So I would go over and we would talk and visit, and I would bring her what she needed and get groceries. And then sometimes there would be a line that would stick out with me, and I started jotting down little notes, and I started posting on Instagram these little stories about my mom. And they started out with her just holding a book that she was reading, and she would talk about them. It started out sort of as these book reviews, or her complaining about Proust. She found him so annoying. Right?
Really?
So then I just started, it sort of expanded that I would collect these little stories. And it was a way that it would be a way that I could do something creative that would sort of lift the weight of the responsibility that I felt. And so it started when she was about 92, no, maybe 90. So she's turning 97 in May. So I'll read you from a few weeks ago. And I take photographs of her or where she lives, or photographs from her past. My mom looked at the tall man standing in front of her, wavy hair halfway down his back, and she stared at his thick, white, well-trimmed beard. Your beard looks just like Woody. Then she looked at her middle son closely and laughed with delight. You are Woody. Then she looked at with me excitement. Woody's here. Woody had been there yesterday. A lot had been changing quickly for our mom. Many days she can't remember how to use her phone, and she says, I never did know how to use that phone. Now family calls her house to ask the staff to hand the phone to her. I've kept my mom supplied with 3 books a week for years, in addition to her daily reading of the New York Times. We placed 2 bright standing lamps next to her chair to make it bright enough for her to read. We worried what would happen if or when she couldn't read. Recently, I realized she hadn't moved ahead in the last book for weeks. A month ago, she found the newspapers too confusing and upsetting. We agreed that she'd take a break from the weekly paper, just keep the Sunday paper. Recently, she said, I think I need an eye exam or new glasses. I can't read. Everything's fuzzy. I got a newspaper and asked her to read the headlines. She could read a few words, but she couldn't read the body of the article at all. She's sleeping later and sometimes napping most of the morning or afternoon, sometimes losing track of when it's night or day. She called me at 10:30 at night, asking why I hadn't gotten her for church. I assured her I wouldn't forget her. I'll see you in the morning. Through all these changes, my mom has been in good spirits. When she and Woody decided to play Parcheesi, she didn't really feel very well and stayed on the couch. So Woody played both parts, rolling the dice, counting the steps, moving the pieces around the board. Mom's pieces sent my brother home near the end. Mom was thrilled to win. She referred to her granddaughter who's starting med school. I'm glad I'm not going to med school. I can barely keep up with Parcheesi. So fortunately, 2 weeks later, she started reading again.
Yeah.
And we don't know what happened, but she was I'll just do an excerpt. She was walking through the kitchen, and there was a note on the refrigerator which said, "Being alive is a special occasion." She said, "I'm a special occasion." And then she said, as we continued walking back to her room, as I'm holding her hand and she's walking with her cane, she said, "I like having you hold my hand." Very sweet. So at some point, I'll put the stories together.
Well, I'm going to have to cheat here. So what I have really switched gears, except not really, because this book, Elemental, A Miscellany of Salt Cotton Islands, which came out in 2022, is part of my North Atlantic Rim project. So I got this itch, like maybe 15 years ago, that I was going to do this North Atlantic Rim project. Now, I really didn't know what I was going to do. What I was attracted to was the landscapes, the shared cultures. There's some kind of energy, on both sides of the Atlantic. So I was writing here and there, and I eventually put together this book. It's a hybrid. It has poetry, essay, and fiction. So that is a long way around to tell you what I am doing now. One of the stories in here is the launch for this project that I'm doing now, which is called Kate's Walk. And it is based in St. John's, Newfoundland in the 1850s. And the reason I got onto this is I had no plan to write a novel, which I'm not even convinced I have the chops to write a novel, to tell you the truth. But the voice of this girl, let me find this. I know I can find it. I put together an exhibit, which I talked about before. Yeah, and it was here. Yes, it was. So the book came out, yada, yada, yada. It was doing good. And then I got this idea. I think why don't we just make some banners, And I was working with Lori Harley, the designer down in Portland. And I said, we've got all the material here and we have all the imagery. Well, you know how these things go. And one of the things, so I was struggling. Well, how's this going to work? And one of the things I realized right away is that I had to have a different arc for the banners exhibit than I had for the book. Because there's only so much you can do, even though they're 3 feet by 5 feet soft fabric that hang on the walls in places like this. There's only so much you can do with text and imagery, right? And you can't let one dominate the other. So it took me a while to kind of figure out that arc and what the connection was between them all. So we produced those. She's wonderful. I've worked with her. This will be my 3rd project that I worked with her on. And she was able to, I don't know if you've worked with somebody in that kind of context before, with imagery and text. I used to be a magazine editor, so I'd worked with the art director, and so I was used to that kind of to and fro, and show me something like this and that kind of thing. But we just really clicked all the way around, and we worked all this time. So she mocked out the first one of these things, and we were trying to decide, well, where are we going to get them printed, and what are we going to get them printed on? And so she said she would do the research on that. And then when we looked at everything, and I said, no, Lori, we're not doing silk, not doing hand silk. That's out of the question. So she started rattling off all this other stuff, and I thought she kept saying, I said, Lori, are you saying FedEx? And she said, yeah, FedEx printing, which they actually have a big storefront for this whole section of their, FedEx down in Portland. So, so she got all the specs on it, and it was going to be like $100 each. So we said, well, we'll get a mock-up from them. So she sent the first one off, and this thing is big. You don't want any mistakes in this kind of stuff. And I know from publishing the kinds of things that can go wrong. So they send it back, a little package, and she says, "You're not going to believe this." And she sent it up to me, and it was unbelievable. The colors were bright and true. The registration was perfect. I mean, you've seen them. They're beautiful. They're just beautiful. And so that's how FedEx came to be our printer at $100 a pop. And so, which was quite cheap, actually, to tell you the truth. So I think I've been in 7 venues now. And just in case they're going to be in Lubeck in June. I've been dying to get them into Lubeck just because I'm a fan of that place. And of course, they move a little slower in Lubeck, and took about 2 years, but we're going to be down there. They're going to be down there for the month of June. So,
And then Blue Hill.
no, in the gallery, the one and only gallery, the Mulholland gallery. It used to be the store, used to be the general store downtown, right there next to where the little museum is. In fact, it's part of the little museum, the salt cod museum, the herring, museum.
And then the banners are going to Word in Blue Hill.
And then that's true. Some of the banners are going to be at the, what's the name of the gallery? Cynthia. Yeah, it's going to be there. I made some connections, and she said she talked to the gallery. It was her idea, Marie from Word.
From Word, right.
And so I looked at the website for the gallery, and I thought, oh, this is really out of my league here.
Really great.
I got these, but sure, I'll do it. So, so the whole exhibit will not be there because it's so large, but some of it will be there for that week. It's gonna be fun. Yeah.
Or Word.
And
right.
and Marie said that she was really interested in text and image. So there we go.
There we go.
That was a long introduction to what I'm going to read. So
Back to Kate.
but here we go. So I have this story called Gray, and it's in the voice of a 15-year-old Outport girl, and so the book was published, but Kate somehow wanted had more of a story, and she wanted it to be told, and it kept hanging around in the back here. And so I just started with this story of Kate's Walk. So I'm going to read I'm going on the fly here of which section I want to read. So just give me a comment. I think I'll read the beginning. And I will say that the beginning was inspired by Susan Connolly. I was in a workshop with her, and the writing prompt was, there's 2 people and one person wants something from somebody else. I'm like, and sometimes you just click, you just get it. Gray, Collins Cove, Newfoundland, 1858. It was so common as to go unnoticed. A mother and girl coming back from the well, a wooden bucket in each hand, walking toward the narrow gray house sitting on the hard Newfoundland ledge. Although I was 15 and strong, I could hardly keep up with my mother's long steps. Her boots had no laces, and when her back left heel lifted, the worn hole in the sole was showed to me. And when the right heel lifted, I could see it was ground down on the inside so that her foot rolled a bit. Worn and ground down. I had often seen her so. Her slack dress hung from her shoulders so it touched no flesh below, which I imagined to be just as slack though she was a young woman. I watched her gray, torn shawl across her back that had seen no tattling needle since it was first knitted. Left, then right. We walked in silence as usual. Left, then right. The house was barely visible in the light fog, its shingles gray and curled against the clouds and sea that were the same. The second-story window on this side was longer than it was wide, with an unpainted mullion down the middle and a crosspiece of a sash. The narrow trim around it had been scraped bare by the wind and salt. "Mother," I said as I trotted to catch up, "perhaps tomorrow we can go to the headland to pick blueberries." "What would we want with blueberries?" she asked. "We can make jam. Remember how good it was last winter from the jar Mrs. Collins had sent over?" "Don't bother me with Mrs. Collins." Mother reached the front stone and the door yielded to her toe. "I'll put the kettle on and we can have a cuppa. There's a bit of scone left." I stopped before saying Mrs. Collins. So, where'd that come from? I have no idea. And the basic story is that the mother goes over the cliff. Under what circumstances, we're not sure, but we're starting to get the idea that she probably made that choice herself. And Kate has already been orphaned at 6 months by what she thinks is her father, Tommy Collins, who ran away to sea and went down with the on the ship. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. And so one of the things we talk about in novels, now that I'm an expert on novels, is what is the book about? And that is not the plot. What is this book about? So it took me about 75 pages to really figure out what the book is about. And it's about lost family, lost father. And she is really going to take this little odyssey of trying to find the mysterious father. Now, I have to tell you that right after this, when the mother went over the cliff, Kate decided to start a new life in St. John's, walking 40 miles, and thus the name of Kate's Walk, and takes her 3 days and 3 nights, and it's kind of a classic.
Otherworldly.
We meet a lot of people, including the gray shawl again. So I'm having a great time with it, and we'll see what happens next. My goal is a tale well told.
So thank you all for coming. This was really so much fun to hang out with all of you and to have all these conversations before and through.